Delia Marsh had answered the phone at Vale and Ashford for 9 years. In 9 years, not one partner had learned to say her last name. They called her Marcy. They called her Marla. Grant Pruitt, the senior partner, called her nothing at all. He just waved. Her nameplate said Marsh, D, ASST. It sat by the elevator, on the service side, where the light was worst. Everyone else in that building had a title. She had an abbreviation. Once, she had corrected them. She didn't anymore. And today, the firm's biggest client was walking out the door. $40 million. Halloran Provisions. Ruth Halloran had sat through 3 meetings being talked over, and now she was done. 11 executives filled the war room. Grant Pruitt was performing, and when Delia stepped in with the one thing that might have saved it, he waved her out in front of all of them. Sweetheart, coffee, then closed the door. Ruth Halloran was already in the elevator. Delia walked to that elevator. The doors were closing, and she said 6 quiet words. Just 6. Ruth Halloran's hand shot out and stopped the doors, and she looked at Delia like she was seeing her for the first time. Delia asked for 10 minutes. Tomorrow, no slides. If you've ever been judged by your dress instead of your heart, if you've ever watched people with titles fail at the very thing you could fix, this story is for you. And if it is, do something for me before we go on. Tap subscribe so the overlooked people in these stories keep finding their moment. And, in the comments, tell me the city you're watching from. I read every one. Now, let me take you back to the beginning. Delia Marsh had wanted, once, to be very good at one thing. Not famous, not rich. Just good, the way a craftsman is good, at the one thing she could do that no one had taught her. She could read people. She could walk into a room and know, in the space of a breath, who was lying and who was frightened and who had already made up their mind. She had been able to do it since she was a girl. It was the only gift she trusted. Vale and Ashford was a branding and strategy firm on the 19th floor of a glass tower in Chicago. Eleanor Vale had built it. 40 years ago, a widow with a good ear and a better spine, Eleanor had started with one desk and a fountain pen and a belief that most companies failed because they stopped listening. She turned that belief into an empire. By the time she died, the firm had 110 employees and a client list that ran to the top of the Fortune 500. Delia kept Eleanor's fountain pen in her desk drawer. Bottom left, under the spare batteries and the mints. Nobody used it anymore. It was a heavy old thing, black and gold, the nib worn to the shape of one particular hand. When the estate was settled, it had ended up in a box of odds and ends bound for storage. Delia had quietly taken it out and kept it. She never wrote with it. She just liked knowing it was there. She kept something else too, a plain spiral notebook. 99 cents at the drugstore. After every meeting she sat in, she wrote one line in it. Not the minutes. Not the action items. The one true thing nobody had said out loud. The thing under the thing. She had been doing it for 9 years. The notebook was almost full. People liked Delia in the way you like the furniture. She was always there. She remembered things. When the mailroom kid Marcus had his GET exam, she was the one who asked how it went. When a VP's wife was sick, Delia was the one who sent the card and forged the whole office's signatures because she knew nobody else would remember. She knew every birthday. She knew who was quietly job hunting before their own boss did. She read the room in one glance, and she was never wrong about people, and no one ever asked her a single thing. That was the arrangement. She had made it herself, and to understand why, you have to understand how she came to be there at all. 9 years ago, Delia Marsh did not arrive as an assistant. She arrived as Eleanor Vale's personal find. Eleanor had met her by accident at a fundraiser, watching a young woman in a cheap dress correctly guess which of 2 smiling donors was about to pull his money. Eleanor had walked over and asked her how she knew. Delia said his feet were already pointed at the door. Eleanor Vale had laughed. A real laugh. and said, "Child, you read people the way I built this place." She hired Delia the next week, not for a role, for a seat beside her. Eleanor was 78 and in the middle of the hardest thing of her career, a full restructure of the firm, and she wanted the one person in the building who could tell her the truth about who was really on her side. For 8 months, Delia sat in the corner of Eleanor's office and watched. And after each meeting, the old woman would turn to her and say, "Well, what did they not say?" And Delia would tell her. And she was right. She was always right. They never wrote it down. Eleanor didn't believe in titles for the thing Delia did. "The minute they know what you are," she said, "they perform for you instead of in front of you. Stay invisible. It's your whole edge." So there was no contract for the real work. On paper, Delia was a temporary administrative hire, filed under the restructure's overflow. Then, Eleanor Vale died. In her sleep, in March, in the middle of everything. No warning. The partners didn't know about the arrangement. Why would they? There was nothing to know it by. And Delia, 25 years old and gutted by a grief she had no right to. Because who was she? Really? Just some girl the old woman had liked. She said nothing. She could have walked into Pruitt's office and said, "Eleanor chose me. Eleanor trusted me. Put me where she wanted me." She didn't. It felt like robbing a grave. It felt like trading on a dead woman's favor, and Delia would rather have died than do that. So when the dust settled and someone needed an assistant by the elevator, Delia Marsh raised her hand. And the nameplate went up. Marsh, D, ASST, and year by year, the woman Eleanor Vale had called her secret weapon became the furniture. She told herself it was honoring Eleanor, keeping quiet. It wasn't. It was hiding. She had made herself so small that she couldn't be heard again, and she called it loyalty, and there is a difference. But Delia had stopped looking at it a long time ago. That was where things stood the morning Sawyer Vale walked in. He came in through the service door by accident, the one by Delia's desk, because the main lobby elevators were down for maintenance, and nobody had told him. He was 38, in a good coat that he wore like it was borrowed, and he looked tired in the specific way of a man who hadn't wanted the thing that was about to happen to him. Delia didn't know who he was. He looked lost, so she helped him. "You want the 19th floor," she said. "Conference rooms to the left. There's a whole pot of coffee in there, but don't drink it. It's from 6 a.m. There's a place on the corner does a real cup." He stopped. "You always warn strangers about the coffee? You look like you've got a long day." "Bad coffee makes it longer." She went back to her screen. He didn't move. "You work here. 9 years. So you'd know," he said. "And there was something careful in it now. There's a pitch going up today. Halloran account. They tell me it's a lock. Is it a lock?" Delia looked at him properly then, and whatever she saw made her decide to tell the truth, which she almost never did out loud, to a stranger. "No," she said. "It's going to fail." He raised an eyebrow. "That's confident. The daughter runs it now. Ruth Halloran. She took over when her father passed." Delia turned in her chair. "Your people have built a strategy pitch. Charts, growth curves, repositioning, very sharp. And she's going to sit there and hate every minute of it, because she's not buying strategy. She's buying respect. She wants somebody to tell her they understand what her father built, and they won't wreck it. Nobody in that deck says that. So, it'll fail." The man was very still. "How do you know that?" "Because I watched her in the last 2 meetings," Delia said. She stopped taking notes the second Pruitt started talking about optimization. People stop writing when they've stopped believing you. That's all. He looked at her for a long moment. Then someone called from down the hall. "Mr. Vale? Mr. Vale, they're ready for you." And a young account manager came hustling around the corner, face white, and said, "Sir, I am so sorry. The main elevator, we didn't. Please, this way." Sawyer Vale, the founder's grandson. Eleanor's blood, come at last to take the chair. Delia felt her stomach drop. She just told the incoming CEO that his firm's biggest pitch was garbage. She turned back to her screen and waited to be fired. She wasn't. He went down the hall. And an hour later, the pitch went exactly the way she said it would. Ruth Halloran sat with her arms folded and her pen down, and when Pruitt finished, she said, "Thank you. We'll be in touch," in the voice people use when they will not be in touch. And Delia, who could see the conference room through the glass from her desk, watched the account start to die. That afternoon, a paper cup appeared on the corner of her desk. Real coffee. The good place on the corner. No note. She looked up, and across the floor, Sawyer Vale caught her eye for half a second, and then looked away. The next morning he walked past her desk and said, "Good morning, Miss Marsh." And he said it right. Marsh. Clean and correct. The first time. Like it had never been hard. Nobody had said her name right in 9 years. She sat with that all day. The Halloran account did not die quickly. It died the way big things die. Slowly, and then all at once. Pruitt took over the save personally. This was his account, his $40 million, and he was not going to lose it to a mood. He doubled down on everything that had already failed. Bigger decks, more data. He flew in a consultant from New York. He sent Ruth Halloran a gift basket the size of a car tire, cheeses and wine, and a leather portfolio with the firm's logo embossed on it. And Delia, packing it at his instruction, wanted to tell him. She's a woman who runs a food company. You don't send her food. It tells her you didn't think about her for 1 second. But he waved her off before she got 3 words out. So she taped the box and said nothing, and wrote it in the notebook that night. The one true thing nobody said. He's insulting her and calling it generosity. Ruth Halloran sent the basket back. Undelivered, Delia signed for the return herself. Camille Frost tried next. Camille was 36 and polished to a mirror shine. A VP the board loved. The woman everyone quietly assumed Sawyer Vale would end up with, because it made a tidy kind of sense. Camille's plan was charm. She took Ruth to lunch at a place with a 2-month wait list and talked, warmly, brilliantly, for 90 minutes. She came back glowing. "She adores me," Camille told the floor. "We're fine." They were not fine. Delia knew the second she saw Camille's face, because Camille was reading her own performance, not Ruth's. She read rooms for leverage, never for truth. She'd spent 90 minutes being wonderful at a woman who wanted to be listened to, and she'd called it a win. And there was a clock on it now, a real one. The name came up in a hallway. Low, the way bad news travels. Kestrel Strategy, the rival shop across the river, younger and hungrier, had been courting Halloran for a month. And they had a term sheet on the table. Ruth Halloran had until Friday to sign it. 5 days. If Vale Ashford didn't turn her around by Friday, the biggest account in the building's history walked across the river, and it took. Everyone knew, but nobody said. The firm's whole next year with it. Sawyer Vale started coming by the service desk. It began small. He'd stop, ask a question, move on. But the questions got sharper. On the 3rd day, he leaned on the corner of her desk and said quietly, "The gift basket." You knew it was a mistake. "Yes, why didn't you say something?" Delia almost laughed. "I did." He waved. Sawyer was quiet. Then, "Tell me why Camille's lunch failed." "She thinks it went great." "Because it did go great," Delia said. For Camille. Ruth Halloran didn't want a great lunch. She wanted to be asked one real question about her father, and answered honestly. Camille performed at her for an hour and a half. Ruth spent 3 meetings being performed at. Another performance, even a charming one, just proves the point. They think she's an account. She wants to be a person. He looked at her the way he had the first morning, like she'd said something in a language he'd been trying to learn. "Say it again," he said. "The person part." "They're treating a 40-year-old family company like a logo," Delia said. "Walt Halloran built it with his hands. She grew up in it. In every meeting, your people talk about growth curves and repositioning like her father's whole life is a slide to be optimized. She's not leaving over money. Kestrel's not paying her more. She's leaving because someone finally has to treat that company like it's worth respecting. And if it's not going to be you, it'll be them. The war room that whole week kept the pattern. Every executive who tried made it worse. And every night, Sawyer Vale found some reason to stand at Delia's desk and ask her why. She'd tell him. She was right every time. And every time, the room upstairs did the opposite. The audience of one grew to know something the whole firm didn't. There was a woman by the elevator who could fix this, and no one would ask her. And the two people who knew it were her and him. Thursday, the room broke. Ruth Halloran agreed to one final meeting, an emergency session. Her people, and the firm's, called to either save the account or bury it. 11 executives on the firm's side. Pruitt at the head of the table because he'd fought for it, because this was his to win, because a man like Grant Pruitt could not imagine that volume was not the same as competence. Delia was told to staff the room. Coffee, water, the Av remote, the door. She stood at the side wall while it happened, and she watched it go wrong from the first minute, the way she'd known it would. Because Pruitt stood up and clicked a slide one and the slide said Halloran, a repositioning roadmap, and Ruth Halloran's pen went down on the table and did not move again. Delia could see it. She could see the whole thing coming, the exact place it would break, and she was 3 feet away, and she was invisible. She waited for a pause. She found one. She stepped in, half a step, and she said, "Low," meant only for the near end of the table. "If I could just, sweetheart." Pruitt said, not even turning. Coffee, then closed the door. 11 executives. 24 people in the room. Ruth Halloran on her feet. Ruth stood up in the middle of Pruitt's sentence. She gathered her folder. She said, "I think we're done here," in a voice with no anger left in it at all, which is the worst kind, and she walked out. Her people scrambled up behind her. Pruitt called after her, too loud, "Ruth, Ruth, let's not be hasty," and the door swung shut on his voice. For 1 second the room was silent. Then it erupted. Everyone talking, nobody listening, Pruitt red-faced saying, she'd be back. She always came around. Women in business, you had to be patient. Delia set down the coffee pot she was still holding. And across the wreck of the table, one person was not talking. Sawyer Vale was looking at Delia. And she knew what he was thinking, because she was thinking it too. She had told him, an hour before this meeting, exactly how it would fail. She had used almost the same words Pruitt had just proven true, and nobody had heard her. Nobody in this whole building ever heard her. She walked out of the room, past all of them, and went after Ruth Halloran. The elevator bay was empty, except for the woman. Ruth stood facing the closed brass doors, jaw tight, waiting for the car. Delia came up beside her. The floor numbers ticked up toward them. The doors opened. Ruth stepped in. Delia stayed on the carpet. The doors began to close. And Delia Marsh said 6 words. "He never once said your father." The door stopped. Ruth's hand was flat against the rubber edge, holding them, and she was staring at Delia now, really staring, the folder pressed to her chest. "What did you say?" 3 meetings, Delia said. 4 now. Nobody in this firm has said Walt Halloran's name out loud one time. Not once. They keep telling you what they'll change. Nobody's told you what you built is worth keeping. She took a breath. "Give me 10 minutes. Tomorrow, no slides. No room full of them. Just me. If I waste your time, you sign with Kestrel Friday, and you'll never hear from me again." Ruth Halloran looked at her for a long moment. At the cheap blazer. At the nameplate she couldn't read from here, but could probably guess at. "Who are you?" "Nobody," Delia said. "I answer the phone. But I've watched every meeting you've been in, and I'm the only one who knows why you're leaving." Something moved in Ruth's face. She let the doors go. They started to close again, and just before they met she said, 10 minutes. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. Don't make me regret it. The doors shut. The car went down. Delia stood alone in the elevator bay with her heart going like a hammer, and she realized what she'd just done. She'd promised the firm's biggest client a meeting. She, the assistant. She had no authority to be in that meeting. She had no authority to be anywhere but the service desk, and she had just put herself directly in the path of everything. When she turned around, Sawyer Vale was standing at the end of the corridor. He'd followed her out. He'd seen the whole thing, the doors, the 6 words, the 10 minutes. He didn't say anything. He just looked at her like a man watching the ground shift under a building he'd thought was solid. That night, Delia stayed late, past everyone. She sat at her desk with the notebook open, and she couldn't think of the one true line, because for the first time in 9 years the true thing was about her, and she didn't know how to write it. Her coat was gone from the back of her chair. She'd left it there. She looked around, confused, and found it draped over the empty chair beside her, folded, collar smoothed. Sawyer had done it on his way out. She hadn't heard him. She sat holding the sleeve of her own coat like it was a strange and frightening object. The next weeks moved fast, and they moved close, because after the elevator, something changed in how Sawyer Vale worked. He stopped routing the hard questions to his partners. He started routing them to Delia. Quietly, off the record. He'd stop by with a problem and stand there while she took it apart. And then he'd go upstairs and do what she said. And it worked. And no one knew why the new CEO-in-waiting had suddenly gotten so good at reading people. She learned things about him, too. She noticed he never ate before a hard meeting. Nerves, she thought, or a habit from some harder time. So on the mornings the calendar looked brutal. An apple appeared on the corner of his desk. No note. He never asked who left it. He just started, on those mornings, looking for it. One evening he covered her coat again, and this time she was still there. And their hands were near, and neither of them moved for a second too long, and then they both stepped back at once and pretended it hadn't happened. He called her Delia for the first time on a Tuesday. Just, thanks, Delia. She called him Sawyer back before she could stop herself. The floor around them went on, not noticing them at all. And then came the dinner. Ruth Halloran, thawing but not sold, agreed to a private dinner. Sawyer's idea. Small, no decks, a quiet restaurant. And he asked Delia to come. You can't bring the assistant to a client dinner, she said. I'm bringing a colleague, he said. You'll sit at the table. You'll say whatever you'd say if titles didn't exist. That's the whole point. She wore the one good dress she owned. She sat at a linen table across from the woman she'd stopped in an elevator. And for the first hour, she mostly listened, because that was the gift. And Sawyer said less than he ever had, because she'd told him to. And it was working. Ruth was easier here, softer at the edges. Then, late over coffee, Ruth said something offhand about her father's old warehouse on the south side, how the firm's plan wanted to modernize the footprint, and Delia saw it. The flicker, the fear under the whole thing, and she set down her cup. You're not afraid we'll fail, Delia said. You're afraid we'll succeed. You're afraid we'll take everything your father built and make it slick and profitable and completely unrecognizable, and it'll do great numbers. And you'll walk through it one day and not be able to find him in it anywhere. That's the thing. You don't want a strategy. You want someone to promise you his company won't stop being his. The table went quiet. Ruth Halloran's eyes were bright. Yes, she said, very simply. That's it. That's exactly it. And for the first time in 4 months, Ruth Halloran smiled at someone from Vale Ashford like they were a human being. She reached across and put her hand over Delia's for a second. Where did they have you hidden? She said. Across the table, Sawyer Vale looked at Delia like the answer to a question he hadn't known he was carrying. And 2 seats down, Camille Frost, who had come along to observe, watched all of it, and her lovely face did not move at all, which was how you knew. Camille understood, in that moment, exactly what Delia was. Not furniture. A threat. The fallout came fast. Pruitt found out an assistant had sat at the Halloran dinner, and he came unglued. He cornered Sawyer in the hall, loud enough for the floor to hear, that it was a humiliation, that clients would talk, that you did not seat the help at the table, that this was precisely the kind of soft, sentimental nonsense that would sink the firm. Delia heard all of it from her desk. She kept her eyes on her screen. She had a lot of practice at that. And there was worse under it. The board's CEO vote was days away now. Sawyer Vale against Grant Pruitt, for the chair Eleanor had left empty. Pruitt had spent 30 years earning it, or believing he had, and he was not going to lose it to a grandson who brought secretaries to dinner. The board liked order. The board liked pedigree. The board liked Camille Frost on Sawyer's arm, and the account saved the old way, and the story clean. So Camille began to dig, quietly, thoroughly, the way she did everything. She started asking questions about the assistant, how she'd been hired, when, by whom. She pulled the old restructure files. She was patient, and she was smart, and she was looking for the thread that would unravel Delia Marsh completely. Delia felt it before she could name it. The way you feel weather coming. Someone was moving in the dark around her, and she didn't know yet how much there was to find. Friday came and went, and Ruth Halloran did not sign with Kestrel. She didn't sign with Vale and Ashford either. She sent one line, to Sawyer, that Delia read over his shoulder because he turned the phone to show her. I'll give you until the month's end, but I want the woman from the dinner in the room, the one who listens, not the man who calls people sweetheart. Pruitt was told the account was still alive. He was not told why. He assumed it was his own persistence finally paying off, and he said as much, loudly, at the Monday meeting, and no one corrected him. Delia sat against the wall and watched a man take credit for a save, built entirely by a woman he'd never once looked at, and she wrote that night's line in the notebook, and it was the truest one she'd written in 9 years. And that was when Delia Marsh made her decision. Because here was the thing she finally understood. Sitting at that service desk with Eleanor's pen in the drawer under her hand, she had spent 9 years hiding. She'd called it grief and loyalty and dignity, and it had been all of those things a little, but mostly it had been fear. She had made herself invisible so completely that she had almost stopped existing, and the woman who'd hired her, the woman who'd said stay invisible, it's your whole edge, that woman had also said, once, in the last month of her life, the tragedy isn't being unseen, Delia, it's agreeing to it. Ruth Halloran wanted the woman who listened, not sent by Sawyer, not smuggled into a dinner as a colleague. So Delia Marsh did the thing that broke 9 years of hiding. She wrote it down, and she made it real. A formal request, in writing, on the record, to the client and to the board both, that she, Delia Marsh, would take the meeting Ruth Halloran had asked for, that she would sit in the room, under her own name, whatever that name was worth, ASST and all. She put her invisible name on the record. She chose, for the first time since Eleanor died, to be seen. She hit send before she could talk herself out of it. And she sat there in the quiet after, hands flat on the desk, knowing there was no unsending it. The board had it now. Pruitt would have it within the hour. Camille, who was still digging, still pulling threads in the dark, now had a name to pull on, out in the open, with a target on it. Delia had just walked into the middle of the room she'd hidden from her whole career, and somewhere in the building, a woman with a folder full of 9-year-old files was smiling, because Delia Marsh had just made herself, at last, worth destroying. The reply came faster than she expected. Not from Pruitt, not from the board. From Sawyer Vale, 3 words in the subject line, and nothing in the body. Come see me. She went. The corner office on the 19th floor still had his grandmother's name on the glass, ghosted where they'd scraped the old vinyl off. Sawyer stood at the window with his back to her. Chicago was gray below him, the lake the color of a nickel. You filed a formal request, he said. He didn't turn around. To the board. Under your own name. I did. Do you know what Pruitt is going to do with that? Yes, she stayed by the door. He's going to try to have me fired before Friday. So the meeting never happens. So the account goes to Kestrel on schedule, and he can tell the board it was always going that way. Now he turned. He looked at her the way people looked at a math problem that had just solved itself in front of them. That's exactly what he said. Word for word. In the hall. 20 minutes ago. I know how he talks. Sawyer came around the desk. He didn't sit. He picked up a pen from the blotter, put it down again. Ruth Halloran is coming Friday. 10 a.m. She asked for you by name in an email to the whole board, so there's no burying it now. You made sure of that. He almost smiled. It didn't quite land. I don't know if that was brave or if you just lit yourself on fire to keep warm. Both, probably. That got the smile the rest of the way. Then it faded, and he was tired again, the way he always was under the good manners. Walk me through it. What happens in that room? So she told him. Not a pitch. She was very clear about that. No deck, no numbers, no $40 million slide with the logo pulsing. She would walk in with nothing but what she'd been carrying for 3 meetings. The true thing nobody at this firm had been willing to say out loud. And what's the true thing? That Ruth Halloran doesn't care about strategy. She never did. Her father built Halloran Provisions with his hands 40 years ago. He died 8 months back, and every person in this building has treated his company like a logo that needs a refresh. She's not shopping for a branding firm. She's watching us decide whether her father gets to still exist inside the thing he made. Nobody said that to her. So she keeps leaving. Sawyer was quiet a long moment. And you want me in the room. I want you in the room saying almost nothing. She stepped closer, just one step, and stopped. You have a habit. When a meeting matters, you fill the silence. You explain. You're good at it, which is the problem. Friday you're going to walk in, you're going to let me open, and you're going to say less than you have ever said in your life. Can you do that? No, he said, but I'll try. She almost laughed. He saw it, and something passed between them that neither one named. He reached for the coffee on his desk, the machine kind, and made a face. And she knew he hadn't eaten. It was after 7, and there was an apple already gone from the bowl by the door because she'd put it there that morning without a note. You should eat something before you go home, she said, and left before either of them could make it into more than it was. The office thinned out. The cleaning crew came through on the far side, vacuums humming like far-off weather. Delia sat at the service desk by the elevator, the one with Marsh, ASST, screwed to the panel, and she opened the bottom left drawer. Under the spare batteries and the tin of mints, there was Eleanor's fountain pen, black and gold. Nobody used it anymore. She took it out and held it in both hands and did not write anything with it. She heard him before she saw him. Sawyer, coat over his arm, on his way to the elevator, later than her for once. He stopped when he saw the pen. That's hers, he said quietly. My grandmother's. I'd know it anywhere. She used to tap it on the table when someone was lying to her. He looked at Delia, and something in his face was very careful now. Why do you have my grandmother's pen? The moment sat between them, wide open, the whole 9 years of it. She could have told him then. She almost did. She could feel the words rising, the ones she'd never said to anyone. She found me. Before any of them. She said I read people the way she built this place. She left it in the desk, Delia said instead. When she cleaned out. Nobody claimed it. I keep it safe. It wasn't a lie. It just wasn't the whole thing, and they both felt the shape of what she wasn't saying. He was close now. Close enough that she could see he needed a shave, that the top button of his shirt was open, that his hand had come to rest on the edge of the desk an inch from hers. Neither of them moved that inch. The vacuum hummed. The lake was black in the windows. Delia, he said. Just her first name. It was the first time. Go home, Mr. Vale, she said gently, and she put the pen back in the drawer, and she closed it, and the inch stayed uncrossed. He nodded. He picked up his coat. On his way past, he lifted her coat off the back of the chair where she'd dropped it and settled it over her shoulders, smoothing the collar down with 2 fingers, the way you would for someone you'd known your whole life. Then he was in the elevator, and the doors closed, and she sat alone with her heart going hard for no reason a titled person would ever have to explain. Friday came the way a verdict comes. Ruth Halloran arrived at 10, with no lawyers and no patience. Pruitt had insisted on being in the room. So had 2 other partners, Anne Camille, and 11 of the executives who'd sat through the collapse 3 weeks ago. They filled the long table on the 19th floor, and they all wore the face people wear when they've come to watch someone fail. Delia walked in last. She wore what she always wore, the plain gray, the flat shoes, no title anyone could see. Pruitt looked at her, and his mouth did something ugly and satisfied. Well, he said to the table, not to her, the assistant. Sit down, Grant, Ruth Halloran said, without looking up. She hadn't come for him. Delia did not sit at the foot. She sat across from Ruth, close, the way you sit with a person, and not an account. She put nothing on the table, no folder, no pen. Her hands were empty and open. You've had 3 meetings in this building, Delia said. You walked out of all 3. I want to tell you why, and I want you to correct me if I'm wrong. Ruth's eyes came up. Sharp. Waiting. You came in here after your father died, wanting to know if the thing he made would still be his after we were done with it. And every single time, someone with a title told you about market position and brand equity and refresh cycles. They showed you a new logo and called it respect. Nobody in this room, in 9 months of meetings, has said your father's name out loud. Walt Halloran. He started it 40 years ago with a truck and a handshake. You're not afraid of failing. You're afraid of succeeding so well that he disappears out of his own company. That's why you keep leaving. Because leaving is the only way left to protect him. The room had gone completely still. Pruitt started to say something. Delia turned her head and looked at him, and for the first time in 9 years, she did not lower her eyes. You keep sending people who talk, she said. To the whole table. To all of them. She's been waiting 9 meetings for someone who'd listen. Nobody breathed. Camille had gone very still at the far end, watching Delia the way you watch a fire jump a road. Ruth Halloran looked at Delia for a long moment. Her jaw was tight. Then, slowly, it wasn't. Say his name again, Ruth said, very quietly. Walt Halloran. Ruth nodded, once, and her eyes were wet and furious and relieved all at the same time. 25 years old he was when he started it. Nobody here ever asked. She put both hands flat on the table. All right. Here's what we're going to do. This firm is not going to refresh anything. This firm is going to be the steward of what my father built. You're going to protect his name inside every new thing you touch, or you're going to lose the account for real. This time, today, and I'm not hearing it from Grant. I'm hearing it from her. She looked at Delia. Can you promise me that? Yes, Delia said. I can. Then we're not going to Kestrel. Ruth stood, buttoned her coat. $40 million, alive, in a plain gray assistant's empty open hands. I'll be back Monday to sign. Have her in the room. And she was gone, and the elevator took her down, and the account went with her, and it did not leave the building. Sawyer had not said a single word the entire time. He'd kept his promise. Now he looked at Delia across the wreckage of the table, at all those titled faces frozen around her, and she watched him understand the whole thing at once. That she was the one, that she'd always been the one, that his grandmother had known it before any of them. It should have been the end. It was Friday and the account was saved and she'd done it in the open, under her own name, with everyone watching. She should have gotten to keep it. She got the weekend. Monday morning, Camille Frost walked into the board meeting with a folder. Delia was there, at the side of the room, near the door, in the chair, by the wall. Ruth Halloran was expected at 11. The partners were arranged around the long table, Pruitt at the head like he already had the chair, And the CEO vote was 3 days out, and everyone in the room could feel it like a change in the weather. Camille didn't sit. She set the folder in the middle of the table and opened it, and she looked at Delia when she spoke. But she talked to the room. "Before we sign anything today," Camille said, "the board should know who they're signing with." 9 years ago, Delia Marsh was not hired as an assistant. She was brought in personally by Eleanor Vale. Off the books. No posting, no interview, no HR file that matches anyone else's. She was planted here. And when Eleanor died, our overlooked assistant kept very quiet about the fact that she had a private arrangement with the founder. Camille let it sit. So when a client asks for her by name, and $40 million suddenly runs through the one person nobody was watching, I think we're owed the question, is this a woman who reads people? Or is this a woman who's been running a very long con on a dead woman's name? The word con went through the room like cold water. Pruitt leaned back, pleased, and spread his hands. "Well," he said, "that does put a different color on our little miracle worker, doesn't it?" Planted, by Eleanor. Manipulating her way in on sentiment. I'd say that's a fireable offense on a normal Tuesday. Never mind the week of a client signing. Delia had gone white, and very still, because it was true. All of it was true. And true in a way that made the truest thing she owned look like the cheapest. That was when the letter surfaced. It came from the estate file, the one the partners had quietly boxed and shelved at the handover 8 months ago, and never fully read. One of the younger partners, a decent man who'd been digging through the same restructure files Camille had, slid a single sheet down the table. "This was in Eleanor's sealed papers," he said. "It's in her hand. It's addressed to whoever runs this firm after her." Sawyer picked it up. He read it silently first. Delia watched his face and knew what it said before he read it aloud. Because she'd known Eleanor. Because it sounded exactly like the woman who'd found her. "Delia Marsh reads people the way I built this place," Sawyer read. His voice was steady, and it cost him something to keep it that way. "She is the finest instrument I ever found, and she will refuse to trade on it, so you must not let her hide. When you cannot save something, put her in the room. She was mine before she was anyone's. Protect her from the men who mistake volume for worth." The room was silent. The letter was signed. Eleanor Vale, in the black and gold ink of a pen that sat in a drawer downstairs under batteries and mints. It should have been vindication. It landed as ammunition. Because Pruitt saw the only angle that saved him, and he took it. "There it is," he said, standing, in writing. She was planted. The founder herself says so. This whole performance, the client, the tears, the 6 magic words at the elevator, all of it choreographed by a woman who's been positioning for this since before any of us knew her name. Read it again. She was mine. That's not an employee. That's an operative. He looked around the table, gathering them. I'm not signing $40 million into the hands of a plant. Are you? And Delia understood that there was no version of this where the letter cleared her. If she stayed, she'd be Eleanor's ghost forever. The con who traded on a dead woman's favor. Exactly the thing she'd spent 9 years refusing to become. The letter that should have made her real had made her, in that room, a thing that could be spun. She stood up. You're right, she said, quietly, to Pruitt, to all of them. I was hers. She found me 25 years old and nobody, and she taught me everything I know about the inside of a person. And I have spent 9 years refusing to say one word about it, because I would rather have been invisible than have any of you think what you're thinking right now. I never wanted her name. I only ever wanted to be good at one thing without borrowing anybody's title to do it. She looked at Sawyer, and her eyes were dry, and it was worse than crying. I won't stay somewhere I have to be defended as if I stole something. I didn't steal anything. I saved your account. And you're standing here deciding whether that makes me a criminal. She walked to the side desk, the little service one by the elevator, Marsh D. ASST, still screwed to the panel, and she opened the bottom left drawer, and she took out Eleanor's pen, and she set it down on the desk in the middle of them all, where anyone could take it. "That was hers," she said. "It should stay in the building. I never wanted anything of hers. Only the one thing she gave me that nobody can put in a folder. She put on her coat herself. Nobody smoothed the collar. Good luck Monday. She'll ask for me. I won't be here." And she walked into the elevator, and the doors closed. And this time, it was Delia Marsh going down, and $40 million staying up, and everything wrong. Ruth Halloran came at 11, and Delia's chair was empty. Pruitt tried to run it himself. He'd waited 9 years and 3 meetings and 1 long weekend, and he came in warm and certain, and he said Walt Halloran's name in the first 30 seconds, like a man planting a flag on someone else's mountain. Ruth let him talk for 90 seconds. Then she stood. "Where is she?" Ruth said. "Ms. Marsh is no longer with the firm," Pruitt said smoothly. "But I can assure you the account is in the most senior hands available. We're prepared to—" "You're not hearing me." Ruth picked up her bag. "I told you Friday. I'm not signing with a firm. I never was. I was going to sign with the one person in this building who said my father's name like she meant it. She's gone, and you're standing there telling me you're senior." Which is the whole problem. Which was always the whole problem. She looked at all of them. The 11 executives, the partners, the empty chair. "Pull it. All of it. We're done." $40 million walked out the door for real, and this time nobody stopped the elevator. Because the only person who knew how was in a coffee shop on the ground floor with her coat still on, not crying, watching the snow start. The first hard freeze came Wednesday. Chicago went white and mean. The lake threw ice at the shore. Wednesday was also the CEO vote. The board wanted it clean. They wanted Sawyer to stand up and disown the assistant scandal, put the firm behind pedigree, put the Vale name behind Camille and stability, and take the chair his grandmother's company had built for him. Pruitt had the account failure to explain, but he'd also successfully framed Delia as a con. And in the story the board wanted to tell themselves, the con was gone, and the grown-ups were back in charge, and all Sawyer had to do was agree. He stood up in front of the full board, and the client's empty seat, and the 11 executives, and Camille with her hands folded, and Pruitt with his chin up. He had the letter in his hand. "My grandmother Sawyer said, founded this firm 40 years ago, and ran it for 30. She hired 110 people over her life, and she was wrong about maybe 4 of them. She was not wrong about Delia Marsh." He held up the single sheet. "You've all heard pieces of this letter used as a weapon. I'm going to read the whole thing out loud one time, and then I'm going to tell you what I've decided." He read it. All of it. "She is the finest instrument I ever found, and she will refuse to trade on it. So you must not let her hide. When you cannot save something, put her in the room. Protect her from the men who mistake volume for worth." He set it down. "On Friday, I watched an assistant with no title and no slides talk a $40 million client back from the door that 11 of you had shoved her through. On Monday, I watched this board decide that the founder's own instrument was a criminal because she was too proud to ever tell you what she was. You want me to take the chair by agreeing with you about that?" He shook his head. "Slowly, I won't. Not on those terms. This firm my grandmother built is worth exactly nothing if it can't hear the one person she trusted more than all of us combined. I don't want to run that firm. I'll run the one that keeps her." Camille's voice was cool. "And the account? It's gone, Sawyer." She left, and Halloran walked. "You're refusing a chair for a woman who already quit and a client who already left. Then we'll get her back," he said. "Both of them." He looked at Pruitt. "Grant, you called her sweetheart in front of 11 executives and told her to close the door. You want to know why we lost the biggest client in the firm's history? Go home and think about the door." And he left the boardroom, and he took the pen off the service desk on his way out. Eleanor's black and gold pen, and he went to find her. She was easy to find. She was where the notebook said she'd be because she'd told Ruth Halloran on Friday, in passing, the name of the coffee place on the ground floor. 99 cents. For a small, real coffee, not the machines. Sawyer had listened. He always listened, it turned out. He just talked over it. He walked in with snow in his hair and her coat, which she'd left, and his grandmother's pen, and he sat down across from her without asking. I read the letter to the whole board, he said. All of it. Then I turned down the chair. She stared at him. You did what? On their terms. I turned it down on their terms. He set the pen on the little table between them, next to her cold coffee. Ruth Halloran will sign, but only into your hand. She told me so herself an hour ago. She's coming back Friday if you're in the room. Not as an assistant. He took a breath. It was the most nervous she'd ever seen him, this careful, competent man. As a partner. I'm offering it in front of the same people who waved you out. Same room. Same table. Everyone who called you furniture watching you sign your name into the wall. Sawyer, her voice caught on his name. The letter makes me a schemer. That's what they'll always. The letter makes you the best person my grandmother ever met. He pushed the pen an inch closer. His hand stopped an inch from hers, the same inch from the late office. The same uncrossed inch that had lived in the middle of everything. She said, put her in the room. I'm putting you in the room. Not because of her. Because you were right in the hallway on my first day. And right at the dinner. And right in the 10 minutes, 3 times before anyone gave you a title. I don't want to run a firm that's too proud to say that out loud. The snow came down outside. She looked at the pen, at his hand, at the inch. Stay, he said. One word. It did all of it. She crossed the inch. Friday, they signed in the boardroom on the 19th floor. The same long table. The same 11 executives. Pruitt was there, because he'd been made to be, and Camille was there, gathering herself into the smallest possible version of herself at the far end. Ruth Halloran came in at 10. She saw Delia sitting where the partners sat, and something in the client's sharp face eased all the way. There she is, Ruth said. They put the contract on the table. $40 million, 3 years, Walt Halloran's name written into the stewardship clause on the first page. Because Delia had insisted. Because she'd promised. Delia reached for a pen, and Sawyer stopped her hand with 2 fingers. Not that one, he said. He took Eleanor's out of his breast pocket, black and gold, and he uncapped it, and he laid it in Delia's palm, and closed her fingers around it. The pen that had sat in a drawer for 9 years under batteries and mints. The pen his grandmother tapped on the table when someone was lying to her. Nobody was lying now. Delia signed. Her whole name. The ink came out of it easy, like it had been waiting. Then Ruth Halloran signed, and before she set the pen down, she looked up at the whole table. At all of them. At Pruitt. I want to be clear, since some of you seemed confused about it, Ruth said. I'm not signing with a firm. I'm signing with her. Each face took its turn. Pruitt looked at the vote that had already gone the day before. Sawyer in the chair after all once he'd named his own terms and the board had blinked. And the account going to a woman he'd called sweetheart. And his own 30 years of pedigree sitting there, proving nothing at all. His mouth opened. Nothing came out that was worth saying, and for once, he seemed to know it. He gathered his folder. It was the only thing he had. And it was empty. Camille Frost stood, unhurried, and put her own things in her bag with great dignity. Because dignity was the only card left in her hand. The exposure she'd built to destroy Delia had become the letter that made Delia real. She'd read the room for leverage her whole career, and she'd missed the only true thing in it. She looked at Delia once on her way out, not with hatred, with something closer to a professional's respect for a better read. Then, she was gone. The 11 executives, who had watched a woman get waved out 3 weeks ago, watched her sign $40 million with the founder's own pen, and some of them had the grace to look ashamed, and all of them, from now on, would learn to say her name. A man from facilities came the following week with a small drill. He took Marsh, D, ASST off the panel by the elevator on the service side. He carried it away. The little desk sat empty after that, and then it was gone too, and the space by the elevator was just a wall. On the 19th floor, on the door of an office with a view of the lake, they put up a new plate. Marsh, D. Under it. One word. Partner. The men and women who had spent 9 years enforcing exactly which side of the building she belonged on, stood in the hall and watched the hierarchy they'd guarded quietly yield. And there was nothing any of them could do about it, because the client had chosen, and the founder had chosen, and the founder's heir had chosen, and all of them had chosen her. After the room cleared on signing day, it was just the two of them and the pen on the table between them. He didn't make a speech. He'd made his speech to the board and he was done with speeches. He picked up his grandmother's pen and capped it and set it in front of her, hers now, and he looked at her across the table where the whole long middle of it had lived. The coat and the corridor and the apple and the inch. Marsh, he said. Just that. Her last name, said correctly, the way not one partner had learned to say it in 9 years. He said it like it was the whole point. Because it was. You finally got it right, she said. I've had it right for a while, he said. I just wasn't allowed to say it out loud. She reached across the table, and this time there was no inch left to cross. His hand was warm. Outside the freeze held the whole city still and bright, and inside it was warm. And for the first time in 9 years, Delia Marsh was exactly where everyone could see her. And she stayed. 1 year later, Halloran Provisions threw an anniversary. Walt Halloran's company, 41 years old now, his name on the door and on the first page of every contract, alive inside the thing he made. Ruth stood up in front of the room and lifted a glass. I want you to meet the person who kept my father in his own company, Ruth said, and she found Delia's face in the crowd. She's the one who heard him and me, when nobody else was even listening. Everybody kept sending me people who talked. She's the one who listened. Delia's spiral notebook, the 99-cent one, the one where she'd written a single true line after every meeting for 9 invisible years, sat on a partner's desk on the 19th floor now. Not hidden in a drawer. Out where people could see it. The firm had a name for the method these days, taught it to the new hires, called it the thing they did that Kestrel couldn't. It was just Delia, written down, finally allowed to be worth something with her name on it. Sawyer brought her coffee at the party. The real kind, 99 cents, not the machines. He'd never once brought her the machines. He set it by her hand without a note and stood beside her, and neither of them said anything, because they didn't have to anymore. On the way out, in the lobby, they passed Grant Pruitt. He was consulting now, somewhere smaller. He looked older. He nodded at Sawyer, and then, because he had to say something, he turned to Delia and reached for her name, and she watched him fumble for it the way he'd fumbled for it for 9 years. Ms. he started. It's Marsh, she said. Pleasantly, without heat. D. period. Partner. And she walked out into the cold, bright evening with the founder's pen in her coat pocket and the man the founder had trusted at her side, past the man who'd never learned to hear her, into a city that had finally, at long last, gotten her name right. The loudest room is almost never the one that hears you. Being overlooked was never the same as being wrong. Somebody in your life has already read you true, even if they never got the title to say so out loud. And somebody out there still will. Tell me where you're watching from. I read every one.